and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. But drops of grief can ne'er repay the debt of love I owe. Here, Lord, I give myself away. 'Tis all that I can do. At the cross where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Bobby, would you lead us in prayer tonight, sir? Amen. While you're standing, tell somebody it's good to see them here tonight.
All right, it is so good to see you here tonight. Appreciate you coming out for the Wednesday night prayer meeting. Hope everybody has had a good week so far up to this point, enjoying the beautiful weather, the longer days, and I tell you, it's good to come to church on Wednesday night and the sun still be shining. And I'm just thankful that you're here tonight. I appreciate every single one of you being here, being a part of the service, and as I said, hope things are going well for you right now. I do want to remind you, the only announcement really of anything right now, there's a lot of things coming up, but the only thing I want you to focus on right now is revival starts Sunday. We're looking forward to a great weekend. Hope you'll be here, be in your place. If you haven't signed up yet for the meals, we've had a great turnout for that. I think we're somewhere around 130 people that have signed up for the suppers, which is the most we've ever had, and we're happy to have more sign up for that. That's Monday and Tuesday night. Now, the suppers will start at 5:30, and the service will start at 6:30. So just remember that on Monday and Tuesday night. But if you haven't signed up yet, there's no cost. It's open for members, guests, visitors, everybody. We just want you to come, make it as easy as possible for you to be here for the services on Monday and Tuesday night. Now, there is a separate sign-up sheet out there for any of the ladies that can make desserts either Monday or Tuesday night. And if you have any questions about that, check with Elisa and she can give you all the details on that. But just remember, revival, revival, revival. Starting Sunday morning, be in your place in Sunday school and come praying, expecting good things to happen. Now, I do have a number of very special prayer requests that I want to mention to you tonight. And let me start by asking you to continue to pray for the family of Miss Madeline Ham. Miss Madeline was one of our members for many, many years here at the church, a very sweet lady who went home to be with the Lord. Her funeral service was today there at Annis Memorial Graveside. And I just want you to continue to remember her family, her friends during this time of loss. Be praying for them, that God will continue to be a help and encouragement to them. And then very special prayer needed tonight for Brother Wayne Hollinsworth Sr. Brother Wayne had his surgery, and it's an incredibly serious surgery where they go, it's not a heart transplant, but they literally put a pump inside the patient. And because of the extreme nature of it, they kept him, it's usually around 48 hours. They'll keep you unconscious after the surgery because they don't want you moving around. And they kept him unconscious even longer. He did good for a couple of days, but today has not been a good day. Today has been several roadblocks that have popped up, some serious potential issues. So I want you to really say a special prayer for him and for this family. I know they would appreciate every prayer that is sent their way, so please remember them in a special way. Continue to pray for Cindy Holbrooks as she recovers from her liver transplant. I know, again, a lot of prayers have been prayed there, and she's had some roadblocks pop up after her surgery, but everything seems to be starting to move in the right direction. We're so thankful for that. Continue to pray for Ricky and Vicki Haynes. Please remember them. I know that Richard and Vicki both need our prayers in a very special way. She's there at the hospital in Riverview, but please pray for them. I want you to keep praying for them, even though they're finally back tonight. They've been out in the wilderness for 2 or 3 weeks, but it's good to have Brother Tommy and Miss Mildred back in their place and feeling much better, and we're so thankful for that. But you just continue to pray for them that they'll have a complete recovery from all of the sickness they had to endure. Remember Dr. Shoemaker's little granddaughter, Ella, Miss Virginia Greenwood. Miss Virginia had to go back into the hospital. She's up at RMC. Miss Virginia's overall health is not doing as good as I know they would like it to be. So please say a special prayer for her and Brother Jerry and the family. Miss Virginia, one of the sweetest ladies you'll ever meet in your life. But right now, she really needs some prayers for all the different things that she's having to deal with. Continue to pray for Bobby and Gail Fulton, especially my Uncle Bobby. Really pray for him. They're just struggling right now with all the health issues and things they're having to face, and I know they'd appreciate your prayers. Continue to pray for Caitlin and Brett, for Candace and Brian White, for Brother Charlie and Miss Pat Watts, for Matthew and Tina Griswood, for Brother Dennis Payne, Johnny Clark, for Brother Jimmy Lipham, Miss Barbara Wright, Brother Steve Wallace, Brother Steve Clark, for Miss Joanne Blair's son Perry, for Miss Barbara Clay, Miss Sue Lee, Miss Orly Kirby, and Brother Robert Burr. Let's remember all of those. And as I say so many times on Wednesday night, that's just scratching the surface of all the people that are on our prayer list. There's many more than that, and we want to ask God to be with each and every one of them. But let's pray for these. Pray for our youth down at the Bible camp tonight, that they'll have a great time there. Pray for our younger kids back here in the fellowship hall, that they'll likewise have a good time there. And then let's just ask God to be preparing our hearts for revival this coming weekend. So with all that in mind, let's take a moment and have a word of prayer. And Brother Chris, if you would, you lead us in a word of prayer. Amen. Thank you for that. And do continue to pray for these folks now throughout the week. And Chris reminded me in his prayer, and I want all of us to really lift up Brother Julio there in Haiti. I don't know if you're watching the news, you're familiar with what's happening in Haiti, but the government has been toppled. There is just armed revolt in the street led by some of the worst people on the face of the planet, and I know the whole nation there is just in turmoil. And for somebody that's trying to serve as a missionary, it's a really dire situation right now. So please remember him, and not just Brother Julio, all the missionaries that are serving there in Haiti, that God will keep his hand on them. Well, tonight we're going to go back to the book of Acts. We've been doing this for months now. Started at the very beginning in Acts 1:1, and now we're up to chapter 22. And last week, starting in chapter 21, as I told you last Wednesday night, we're entering the climactic portion of the book of Acts. This is the beginning of the end, starting in chapter 21, because the end, it all revolves around Paul at this point. And it all started to go downhill when Paul was determined to go to Rome. And we talked about this last time. Just to quickly refresh your memory, I just want you to remind you that ever since we were in Acts 9, where Paul became a Christian after the many years of being a Pharisee and a persecutor of the church, that he was, as God said in Acts 9, that Paul was going to be a chosen vessel, that he was going to be somebody incredibly significant in the cause of Christ, that one day he would stand before kings and emperors. We're about to see that fulfilled here in these next couple of weeks. So this is where it all starts. Paul goes back to Jerusalem. He's there for a few days, but then he was spotted on the Temple Mount. And he was arrested, or not arrested, he was taken by the mob there on the Temple Mount. The Romans, the soldiers that are up in the towers in Fort Antonio watching the Temple Mount, they see this uproar taking place. They run down on the surface of the Temple Mount. They rescue Paul from the mob. And as you'll remember, they were literally trying to tear Paul limb from limb. The soldiers had to pick Paul up over their heads to carry him through the mob to save him from this wild crowd that was determined to kill him. Now, the chief officer of the Roman party that was there, he thinks Paul's just some hooligan, some wild-eyed fanatic, and he even mentions a couple of the people that he thought Paul might be. But the last thing he thought was that Paul was some educated guy, until Paul turned to him and spoke to him in Greek and asked him if he could address the crowd. They're going up the stairs towards the fort, away from the Temple Mount, and Paul says, "Hey, do you mind if I talk to these people? I think I can calm this down." And the guy was so stunned that this guy was an educated man able to speak Greek that he said, "Okay." And Paul turns to the crowd to speak to them, and that's where we left it last Wednesday night. So we're going to pick right up. Even though there's a chapter break, the story continues right on with no interruption, and notice what happens. Look at verse 1. "Men and brethren and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you." Now just picture the mental image here. Paul is standing on this stairway up above the crowd. He's out of harm's way, but still close enough everybody can hear him. And everybody gets quiet. And notice why they get quiet. Notice, first of all, he calls them brethren. Now that doesn't mean fellow believers necessarily here. It means more of a fellow Jewish people. He's identifying with them. But notice what happens. This is a little parenthetical statement from Luke here, where he says, "When they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence, and he saith." Luke just points out, because Luke's there with him, and Luke says, as soon as they heard Paul speak in their Hebrew tongue, they were like, wait a minute, this guy speaks Hebrew. And again, here's Paul, this guy that could speak various different languages fluently, and he's using that ability, number one, with the Romans, and now number two, to address his own people. So when they heard that, everybody got quiet and listened. He starts to give his testimony. This is what Paul always does. He just gives his testimony. And I want you to understand something. One of the most powerful things you have is your testimony of how God saved you. Now look, it's wonderful if you memorize the Romans Road. It's tremendous if you know various methods of how to win somebody to God. But the most powerful story you have is the story that, hey, this is who I was before Christ and this is who I am after Christ. The only catch to that is there has to be a difference. I mean, there actually has to be a difference that people can see. That people can say, you know, I knew this person before and I've known them after, and God has made a difference. But that's the most powerful tool you have, is to just share your testimony. See, here's the thing. You can talk to somebody and you can quote Bible verses, but if they're an unbeliever, they may not have any respect at all for the Bible. They may think, well, I don't care what the Bible says. But if you have a personal story of your relationship with Christ, and it's one that your family and friends and coworkers can see is a reality in your life, you can't argue with that. The idea that God made a difference in my life. And that's what Paul always reverts to. Now listen to what he says. I am verily a man, which am a Jew. First of all, he identifies with them. Born in Tarshish, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel. Now I guarantee you, when he said that sentence, that got everybody's attention. He said, now look, I was born in Tarshish. I was born outside of the land of Israel. I grew up a Greek Jew, and I know all the ways of the Greek, including their language and all of that. He said, but once I became an adult, I came here to study as a rabbi, and my teacher was Gamaliel. You say, why is that such a big deal? Because Gamaliel was the most famous rabbi of that day. He is still to this day considered one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history. And when Paul said, you know, not only am I a Jew, I'm very religious, and my teacher was Gamaliel. Everybody's like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe we got the wrong idea about this guy. And I taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers and was zealous towards God, as you all are this day. He's saying, I was just like you guys. I loved the law. I loved the Old Testament. I loved the sacrificial system. I loved all that. As Paul would say in another place, he said, I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. I was the most religious Jew ever. But he continues on. And I persecuted this way unto the death. Now, as we've said many times, going through the book of Acts, in the book of Acts, Christians weren't commonly known as Christians yet. They were called the people of the way. Now, the reason they were called that was from the verse John 14:6, where Jesus said, I am what? The way. So his followers were called the people of the way. That's what it always refers to in the book of Acts. So Paul is saying, I persecuted this way. What he's literally saying is, I persecuted Christians. I went after them even unto the death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women. Paul said, I was after. I didn't just go after the guys. I went after everybody. And I mean, I persecuted them even to their death. One of the greatest statements that I've ever heard, and it comes from a famous Max Lucado book, The Applause of Heaven, is the idea that when Paul finally arrived in heaven, he was applauded and welcomed by the very people he martyred. Now just think about that for a second. That's an astounding thought. That only happens in Christianity, where you spend a lifetime, or at least a number of years of your life, putting these people in prison and to death. And then you become a convert yourself after meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus, and then you serve him in such an incredible way that when you walk into heaven, the people that are walking up and hugging you are the people that you killed. That's an amazing testimony of what the grace of God can do for everybody, what the forgiveness of God can do for everybody. But Paul says, I went after everybody. As also the high priest doth bear me witness. He said, just go ask the high priest. He'll tell you. I was his number one guy. And all the estate of the elders, from whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus. Here comes the climax to his testimony. I went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished. He said, I even went to cities outside of Israel, tracking them down. I mean, I was after those Christians. But he says this happened. It came to pass that as I made my journey and was come nigh or near unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. Now, in another one of Paul's testimonies that comes a little later in the book of Acts, he even makes this point. He says, again, it was noontime. And think about where he's at. He's out in the Middle Eastern desert where the sun beams down like crazy. But Paul says there was a light that fell down from heaven that was brighter than the noonday sun. He said it was a light that was so bright it knocked me off my horse and blinded me. That's how bright it was. So you can only imagine how bright that heavenly light was. And I fell unto the ground, and I heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? He said, I heard this voice from heaven. Now, do you think the people there are listening at this moment? And you could have heard a pin drop. They're into what this guy is saying. They're thinking maybe he's not what we thought he was. And he says, I heard this voice from heaven saying, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And Paul is saying, that's when my life changed. Because I had believed with all of my heart up to this point that Jesus was a false prophet and that the people who followed him were leading good Jewish people away from the true faith and into the gates of hell, believing on a guy that was executed, put to death, and is buried in the ground. But when I heard him speak to me from heaven, you know what Paul is saying? What happened in a blink of an eye? I realized I was wrong. I was wrong. If Jesus is in heaven, that means he really was who all of his followers said he was. And it means I was wrong. And just think all the things that washed over Paul in that moment, realizing all these people that I've imprisoned, all these people that I had put to death, they were right. I was wrong. I murdered innocent people. All that happens to him in that moment. And they that were with me saw indeed the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise, go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do. He says, now the guys that were with me, my traveling party, they saw the light, but they didn't hear the voice. Only I heard the voice. And I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And he said, continue on to Damascus, and there it'll be told you what your new mission is. And of course, that's exactly what Paul did. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus. Paul said I was blinded. He said for several days I couldn't see. The light was so bright, but they helped me travel on into Damascus. And one Ananias, a devout man, according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. And the same hour I looked up upon him. Now he's just continuing his testimony. That's the most powerful story he has. He says, I went on into Damascus, and this guy Ananias came to see me, and he said for me to receive my sight, and I did, and I looked up, and I saw this guy. And he said, the God of our fathers has chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. Again, it was Ananias that told Paul, you are a chosen vessel in the eyes of God. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. Ananias told him, you're going to go all over the world telling people about what God has done for you and the truth about who Jesus Christ is. And now, why tarriest thou? This is still Ananias talking. Arise, be baptized, wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And it came to pass that when I was come again to Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance. And I saw him saying to me, make haste, get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. Now Paul is saying, once I got saved, I went back to Jerusalem. But he said, then I had to leave. Why did he have to leave? Because most of the Christians didn't trust him yet. And so God sent him back to his homeland for several years for God to get him ready for this incredible mission that God had for him. And I said, Lord, they know that I imprisoned and beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. He says, God, it's no wonder they hate me. They know what I did. I'd hate me too if I was one of them. And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by, consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that slew him. He said the very first guy that ever died for being one of the way, he said, I was there. I was right in the middle of it. He said, no wonder they hated me back then. And he said unto me, depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. Now that's great news for us. This is the first time God kind of lets Paul know, Paul, you know, you're going to work with your own people some too, but your main mission is going to be to reach the Gentiles. Now for us, that sounds wonderful. But for the crowd he was speaking to, how do you think that sounded? And they gave him audience unto this word. Until he said that, the word Gentiles, they were with him. But when he said, hey, I'm trying to get all the Gentiles to join all of us in heaven. And then lifted up their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit that he should live. Now they're back to a wild-eyed mob again when they heard that. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust in the air. Can you imagine that scene? This is several thousand people. And I mean, they're ripping their clothes, they're screaming, they're hollering, they're throwing dust in the air. They're going wild over this idea. This man's trying to make us have to share heaven with Gentiles. The chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, that's Fort Antonio, and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. Now, this Roman officer, we're going to see his name here shortly, but when he sees the reaction, I mean, at first it was going great. He was like, well, maybe this guy can calm things down. And then he says the word Gentile. Of course, the problem is the Roman officer doesn't speak Hebrew. So he don't really know what Paul's saying. All he knows is he got to a certain point in his speech, and that crowd down on the Temple Mount went wild. They're bloodthirsty, screaming again. And he said, get this guy into the castle. And once they got into the castle, he said, I want you to take him and I want you to scourge him. We're going to get the truth out of him about who he is. Now, you know what scourging is. You remember we're going to be celebrating Easter Sunday in just a couple of weeks now. And you remember when Jesus was scourged, what a brutal thing that is. And the fact that many prisoners died from scourging, from blood loss and shock to the body. Many people didn't even survive that. And he says, okay, I want you to take this guy and I want you to do that to him, and we're going to get the truth out of him. And as they bound him with thongs, now this is where Paul's incredible wisdom and the fact that he was this cosmopolitan type guy, although he was absolutely a Jew through and through, the fact that he had been born in Cilicia, in Greece, and had that background, he knew everything he needed to do right here. Paul, I've talked about this a lot in my situation the 3 or 4 years ago, you know, where you play every card you've got, and then eventually you get down to your last card. Well, Paul's down to just a handful of cards left to play. I mean, he's just about he's got very few aces left up his sleeve. But he pulls one out right here. As they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? Now, I don't know if you understand it yet or not, but Paul just dropped a bomb in that room. And he does it so calmly. He does it, I mean, he's not being loud, he's not being arrogant. He just looks over at the centurion, the officer in charge, and says, hey, I got a question for you. Yeah, what? He said, is it lawful for you to scourge a Roman citizen that stands unaccused of a crime? By the way, it wasn't lawful. And anybody that treated a Roman citizen in such a manner, you know what the punishment was? To have the same thing done to them. Because as a Roman citizen, you had a host of legal rights. And remember, the vast majority of people that lived under the Roman Empire were not Roman citizens. As we're about to see, some of the main figures in the army, they weren't Roman citizens. But Paul was. And he understood that he had this right. And so with the perfect moment, I mean, they're literally binding him up. And he says, hey, you know, by the way, I'm a Roman citizen. Is what you're doing legal? Notice what happens. When the centurion heard that, he went and told to the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. You know, he just like, oh, wait, everybody just hold your place. Let me go talk to the big guy. And he goes up and he says, you better be really careful right here. This man is a Roman citizen. Now, one of the questions people often ask is, well, couldn't anybody just claim to be a Roman citizen? Yeah, you could. But you know what the punishment was for anybody that falsely made that claim? To be put to death, horribly. So that was not something you just walked around saying if it wasn't true. So they understood if somebody says that, more than likely, the vast majority of times, they really are. So he tells them, we got to watch out here. This guy's a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto Paul, tell me, art thou a Roman? Are you a Roman citizen? And he said, yes. And the chief captain answered, with a great sum obtained I this freedom. The chief captain, he can't believe it. He thought this guy was some wild-eyed fanatic, but it turns out he speaks multiple languages, and now he finds out he's a Roman citizen, which was rare. And he looks at Paul and he says, you know, I had to pay a ton of money to obtain my citizenship in Rome. He's a Roman officer, still not a citizen. Most weren't, only a few. He said, it cost me a lot of money to get that. And Paul said, but I was freeborn. That just simply means, Paul said, I was born a Roman citizen. That means his parents were citizens, and by the nature of just his birth, he was granted Roman citizenship from the day he was born. And when the soldiers, when that chief officer heard that, notice what happens. Then straight away they departed from him, which should have examined him. You know what everybody did? The guy that was getting the scourge ready and the guy that was going to ask all the questions, they just turned and walked out of the room. Nope, we're done. I am not having any part in this. Because if this guy's really a Roman citizen and we're not even accusing him of a crime and we do that to him, they're going to be doing the same thing to me before this thing is over. And they all just, they were out, we're out of here. And the chief captain also was afraid after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him, he's scared that they just tied him up. Because that again can happen to him. On the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands, commanded the chief priests and all the councils to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. Here's what he decides to do. He says, okay, scourging is out. Putting you in any kind of tied up, handcuffed situation in irons, that's out. But he looks at Paul and he says, would you like to go down and appear before? He said, I know these Jews, they have a religious council. Would you mind going with me down to that so that I can kind of get to the bottom of what's going on here? So you know what he just said to Paul? He said, Paul, would you like to have an opportunity to speak to the Sanhedrin court? You know what Paul said? Absolutely. I would love to talk to those guys. That was Paul's old crowd. He used to be a part of that. And that sets up what we're going to look at next week. But here's what I want to leave you with. There is no more powerful weapon in your Christian life than your testimony. So make a habit of sharing it. As you read, and you'll see this over and over through these last few chapters, every chance Paul got, he told this same story over and over and over again. Because that is the most powerful story you have, is what God did for you. So let's be willing to share it with other people. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity to be here in your house. And Father, I do pray that we would make a habit when we're talking to people of just sharing the story of what you did for us. Father, there is no limit to how you can use those types of stories about how your son changed our life to make a difference in the lives of others. So help us to be bold and faithful to just share that with people. And God, I pray that also we would just continue to pray for our revival this weekend, that we just pray that you'll do great things. And Father, I pray that you will do great things in this coming weekend. Now, with every head bowed, in a moment we're going to stand, we're going to sing. Maybe there's somebody here that on a Wednesday night, you have a burden, a need, a situation, a decision, something that you need to do. before you leave here tonight. We always want to give you that chance. If there's a prayer you need to pray, whatever it might be, we want to invite you to come. Let's stand together, and as we sing, for any reason, I invite you to come.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou biddest me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come,
All right, listen, I want to thank you for being here tonight. I hope you've enjoyed your time here. Don't rush out. Tell some folks you're glad to see them. It's still light outside. Don't be in a hurry to get away. Don't forget to sign up for the suppers or the desserts. Pray for a revival. Invite somebody. And most importantly, be here Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in your class, and we're going to be expecting a great day. But right now, turn around, shake some hands, and after that, you are dismissed. Go on and head that way. Listen, tell Mom to do whatever she's going to do and get ready to sit down for a little while. Huh? I'll get it.